Have you ever felt like you're living in a different world than everyone around you? Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically. Like you're tuned into frequencies others can't even hear. You walk into a room full of laughter and feel completely alone. You engage in conversations that should connect you to people, but instead, they just remind you how far apart you really are. And the worst part, you start wondering if something's wrong with you. If maybe you're just broken in some fundamental way that nobody else seems to be. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. You're not broken. You're awake. And being awake in a world that's still dreaming is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon. Why some people think deeper, feel more intensely, and suffer more quietly than others. And what he discovered will probably make you feel seen in a way you haven't felt in years. Maybe ever. This video isn't about fixing you. It's not about making you more social or teaching you how to fit in better. It's about understanding why depth creates distance, why awareness breeds isolation, and why the loneliness you feel might actually be evidence of something profound happening inside you. We're going to explore the psychology of deep thinkers, why society misunderstands you, why small talk drains your soul, and why finding your tribe requires walking through a desert first. And look, if this resonates with you at all, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells me you want more content like this, and honestly, it helps us reach other people who desperately need to hear they're not alone in feeling this way. We're building something here, a community of people who refuse to stay asleep. So stick with me until the end, because what Jung understood about loneliness and consciousness might just change how you see your entire life. Now, let's talk about why seeing clearly feels like a curse. You know what nobody tells you about becoming a deep thinker? It's not some badge of honor you get to wear proudly at parties. It's more like walking around with X-ray vision in a world where everyone's agreed to pretend the walls are solid. You see the cracks, the contradictions, the quiet desperation hiding behind polite smiles. And suddenly, you're the weird one for noticing. Carl Jung called this the burden of consciousness. And let me tell you, he wasn't being poetic. He meant it literally. The more aware you become, the heavier the world feels. You start picking up on things others miss entirely. The performative nature of most conversations, the shallow motivations driving people's choices, the collective agreement to never dig too deep. And here's the kicker. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. This isn't about being smarter than everyone else. That's ego talking, and ego loves to dress up loneliness as superiority. No, this is about operating on a different frequency. Think of it like this. Most people are listening to FM radio, clear, predictable, popular stations playing the same hits. But you've somehow tuned into AM frequencies, picking up distant signals, static, voices from far away. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And different, in a world that rewards conformity, feels like punishment. You'll find yourself in conversations where everyone's laughing, nodding, agreeing, and you're standing there wondering if you're the only one who noticed nobody actually said anything meaningful. It's exhausting. It's isolating. And it makes you question whether something's wrong with you. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. This clarity isn't a defect. It's a developmental stage. When you start seeing through the social masks, the rehearsed personas, the agreed-upon lies we tell ourselves, you're not broken. You're waking up. And waking up, my friend, is a lonely business. Because while you're rubbing the sleep from your eyes, everyone else is still dreaming. They're comfortable in the dream. They've built entire lives inside it. And here you come, asking uncomfortable questions, pointing out inconsistencies, refusing to play along. Of course, they'll look at you like you're the problem. The dreamer always resents the person shaking their shoulder. You become a living reminder of something they're working very hard to ignore. Now, you might be thinking, so what do I do? Just accept being the outsider forever. Not quite. See, Jung also talked about integration, learning to live with your awareness without letting it destroy you. Because that's the real trap, isn't it? You can become so obsessed with seeing through everything that you forget to actually live. You can get so caught up in analyzing the performance that you forget you're also an actor on the same stage. Deep thinkers often fall into this pit, thinking themselves out of genuine connection, out of joy, out of presence. They become spectators of life rather than participants. And that's when the loneliness turns from a side effect of awareness into a self-imposed prison. But there's another way to navigate this, a way that doesn't require you to dumb yourself down or cut yourself off completely. And it starts with understanding something crucial about human psychology. Carl Jung had this concept he called the shadow, all the parts of ourselves and our society that we shove into the basement and pretend don't exist. The rage, the selfishness, the pettiness, the primal urges we've dressed up in suits and smartphones. Most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow, building elaborate defenses to avoid confronting it. But deep thinkers, you can't help but stare directly into it. It's like you got a compulsion to lift every rock, to peek behind every curtain, to ask but why, until you've stripped away every comfortable illusion. And let me tell you, that makes you incredibly uncomfortable to be around. Because when you're not afraid of your own shadow, you stop being afraid of other people's shadows too. You see their hidden motivations, their unspoken fears, their carefully concealed insecurities, and they can sense that you see it. This is why small talk feels like torture for deep thinkers. It's not that you're too good for it or too intellectual. It's that you instinctively recognize it as a defense mechanism, a social ritual designed specifically to keep the shadow at bay. How's the weather? Did you see the game? Busy week. These aren't real questions. They're verbal agreements to stay on the surface, to not make waves, to pretend we're all just fine. And for most people, that's perfectly functional. They need that buffer. They need those shallow waters to paddle around in safely. But you're like a deep-sea diver who keeps trying to drag the conversation down to crushing depths where most people's social lungs can't handle the pressure. You're not trying to be difficult. You're just suffocating in the shallow end. Jung believed that true psychological growth required confronting the shadow, both personal and collective. He argued that societies that refuse to acknowledge their darkness inevitably project it outward, creating enemies and scapegoats rather than dealing with their own internal contradictions. Sound familiar? Deep thinkers see this pattern everywhere. You watch people demonize others for qualities they possess, but refuse to acknowledge in themselves. You see entire cultures built on denial, on collective agreements to never look too closely at uncomfortable truths. And when you point it out, gently, cautiously, hoping someone else sees it too, you're met with hostility or, worse, polite dismissal. You think too much, they'll say. Not everything has to be so complicated. Translation: please stop making me uncomfortable with reality. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. The more you integrate your shadow, the more whole you become, but also the more isolated you might feel temporarily. Because integration means accepting your darkness without letting it control you, acknowledging your animal nature without being ruled by it, seeing society's collective madness without drowning in cynicism. It means carrying a level of self-awareness that most people find unbearable to even consider. You become like someone who's learned to see in the dark while everyone else is still arguing about whether darkness even exists. And this brings up something crucial about social connection that most psychology books won't tell you straight. Sometimes, the path to genuine connection requires walking through a desert of disconnection first. You've got to be willing to lose the shallow bonds before you can find the deep ones. But that requires understanding something most people get backwards about loneliness itself. Let's talk about why being around certain people feels like you're constantly walking uphill in wet sand. You ever notice how after spending time with most people, you feel drained? Not just tired, depleted. Like someone's been siphoning energy directly from your soul. Deep thinkers experience this acutely, and for years, they blame themselves. I must be antisocial. I must be depressed. I must be broken somehow. But Jung would tell you something different. You're not broken. You're just incompatible. It's like trying to run Windows software on a Mac. Everything technically functions, but there's constant friction, constant translation errors, constant workarounds required just to maintain basic communication. And that friction isn't your fault. It's a fundamental mismatch in operating systems. Here's what's actually happening. Most social interactions run on scripts, agreed upon exchanges that require minimal thought and produce predictable outcomes. Hey, how are you? Good, you? Good, thanks. Nobody's actually asking how you are. Nobody actually wants the real answer. It's a verbal handshake, nothing more. And for most people, that's sufficient, even comforting. But deep thinkers process differently. When you ask them how they are, their brain actually runs a diagnostic. They consider their emotional state, their recent experiences, the existential weight of consciousness itself. And then they have to compress all that into good, thanks, because they've learned that anything else makes people uncomfortable. You're constantly translating your inner experience into socially acceptable sound bites. And that translation process, exhausting. Carl Jung talked about persona, the mask we wear in public, the socially acceptable version of ourselves we present to the world. Everyone has one. But deep thinkers are painfully aware of the gap between their persona and their actual inner life. You can feel yourself performing, adjusting, modulating your real thoughts into palatable versions. You watch others do the same, and you see right through it. This creates a weird dynamic where you're simultaneously in the conversation and observing it from outside, like watching a play you're also acting in. You see the mechanisms, the social choreography, the unspoken rules everyone's following. And once you see the matrix code, you can't just unsee it and enjoy the movie. Other people seem so natural, so effortless in their interactions. But you're hyper-aware of every word choice, every facial expression, every subtle shift in energy. It's like everyone else is dancing instinctively while you're manually controlling every muscle movement. This is why deep thinkers often prefer solitude. Not because they hate people, but because solitude is the only time they can stop performing. The only time they can stop translating. The only time they can exist without that exhausting gap between what they think and what they say. And society reads this preference as antisocial behavior, as something to be fixed. You need to get out more. You need to be more social. You're isolating yourself. But what they don't understand is that for you, solitude isn't isolation, it's restoration. It's the only time you get to breathe without filtering the air first. And here's the thing most people won't tell you. The exhaustion you feel after social interactions isn't because you're defective. It's because you're using a level of consciousness that requires more energy than most people ever access. But that same consciousness is also what makes you capable of something most people never experience. Let's get brutally honest about something. The loneliness you feel isn't going away. Not completely. Not permanently. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you comfortable lies. Jung understood this. He wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Read that again. You can be surrounded by people, at parties, at work, in relationships, and still feel profoundly alone. Because the loneliness of deep thinkers isn't about quantity of connection. It's about quality of understanding. It's about living in a world where most conversations never touch the depths where you actually exist. You're like a deep-sea creature, occasionally visiting the surface. You can manage it. You can function there, but you're never quite at home in those shallow, sunlit waters. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung also believed this loneliness was a sign of psychological development, not deterioration. He saw it as evidence that you'd outgrown certain levels of consciousness and were transitioning to new ones. Think of it like this. When a snake sheds its skin, there's a vulnerable period where the old skin no longer fits, but the new one hasn't fully formed yet. That's uncomfortable. That's isolating. But it's also necessary for growth. The loneliness you feel might not be a problem to solve. It might be a symptom of evolution. You're no longer satisfied with surface-level existence, but you haven't yet found your community of depth. You're in transition, and transitions, by definition, are lonely. Nobody can walk that bridge with you. They can wave from one side or greet you on the other, but the actual crossing, that's solo work. This is why so many deep thinkers go through what feels like a dark night of the soul. You look around and see people seemingly happy with lives that would suffocate you. You watch them find fulfillment in things that feel hollow to you. Status updates, consumer purchases, tribal identities, manufactured drama. And you start wondering if maybe you're the problem. Maybe if you could just turn your brain off, just stop analyzing everything, just accept things at face value. Maybe then you'd be happy too. But Jung would tell you that's regression, not progress. That's choosing comfort over authenticity. And while there's nothing wrong with people who are genuinely content in those spaces, you can't force yourself back into a consciousness you've already outgrown. It's like trying to believe in Santa Claus again after you've seen your parents wrapping the presents. The innocence is gone. The magic is gone. And grieving that loss is part of the process. So what do you do with this loneliness? Jung's answer might surprise you. You learn to befriend it. You stop treating it as evidence of your brokenness and start seeing it as a companion on your journey. Loneliness becomes less like a wound and more like a weather pattern. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it passes, but it's always there in some form because you're living in a different climate than most people. You learn to find richness in solitude, depth in silence, connection in unexpected places. You stop expecting crowds to understand you and start appreciating the rare individual who does. And most importantly, you start building a relationship with yourself that's so solid, so nourishing, that other people's incomprehension stings less. Not because you become cold or detached, but because you've found stability in your own depth. And that stability creates something most people never develop. Here's something nobody warns you about. Living authentically in an inauthentic world is an act of rebellion. Not the loud, attention-seeking kind, the quiet, uncomfortable kind that makes people squirm without quite knowing why. When you refuse to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, when you decline to participate in gossip, when you won't pretend to care about things that bore you, you're not being rude. You're withdrawing your consent from collective theater. And that makes people nervous. Because if you're not playing the game, you're implicitly suggesting the game is optional. And if the game is optional, then everyone else might have to confront why they're still playing it. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming your genuine self rather than a copy of collective expectations. And it's terrifying for most people to witness because it holds up a mirror to their own compromises. Deep thinkers often stumble into authenticity not through choice, but through necessity. You literally can't maintain the facade. It's too exhausting, too soul-crushing, too obviously hollow. So you start making small rebellions, answering "How are you?" honestly, admitting when you don't know something, expressing unpopular opinions gently, refusing to fake enthusiasm for things that leave you cold. And people react strangely to this. Some are hostile. You're breaking unspoken rules, making them feel their own inauthenticity. Some are fascinated. They sense freedom in you that they've denied themselves. And some just avoid you entirely because you've become unpredictable, uncontrollable, unwilling to follow the social script. You become a wild card in a deck that's supposed to be carefully stacked. And wild cards make people uncomfortable. But here's the beautiful paradox Jung discovered. The more authentic you become, the lonelier you might feel at first, but the connections you do make become exponentially more meaningful. Because you're no longer attracting people who relate to your mask. You're attracting people who see your actual face. And yes, that means fewer connections. Yes, that means longer periods of solitude. But it also means that when you do connect with someone, it's real. It's nourishing. It doesn't drain you because there's no performance required, no translation necessary, no gap between what you think and what you say. You find your people not by broadcasting to everyone, but by being so genuinely yourself that the right people recognize themselves in you. It's quality over quantity taken to its logical conclusion. and it requires patience most people don't have. This is where most deep thinkers make a critical mistake. They assume authenticity means never adapting, never compromising, never meeting anyone halfway. They confuse authenticity with rigidity. But Jung understood something subtle. Authenticity isn't about being yourself in exactly the same way in every context. It's about never betraying your core while remaining flexible in your expression. You can engage in small talk without lying. You can participate in social rituals without losing yourself. You can adapt your communication style without abandoning your truth. The key is maintaining internal consistency while allowing external flexibility. Think of it like water. It takes the shape of whatever container it's in, but it never stops being water. You can flow through different social contexts without losing your essential nature. And once you master that balance, you discover something crucial about finding genuine connection in an artificial world. Let me tell you the hard truth about finding your tribe. They're not where you've been looking. Deep thinkers often make the mistake of searching for connection in conventional spaces, networking events, social gatherings, typical friendships, and then feeling disappointed when nobody gets them. But Jung would tell you that's like fishing for deep-sea creatures in a swimming pool. You're using the right bait in the wrong water. Your people aren't hanging out at surface level. They're not the loudest voices in the room or the most socially visible. They're often alone too, wondering where everyone like them is hiding. And the paradox is this: to find your tribe, you first have to stop pretending to belong to tribes that aren't yours. You have to risk the loneliness of authenticity before you can experience the connection it makes possible. So where are they? Your people are usually found in liminal spaces, the margins, the in-betweens, the places where depth is permitted or even encouraged. They're in that random Reddit thread at 2 a.m. discussing existential philosophy. They're in the person who lingers after the event ends, wanting to continue the one real conversation that happened. They're in online communities built around specific ideas rather than geographic proximity. They're in bookstores, museums, weird workshops, philosophy meetups that only 6 people attend. Jung himself found his tribe not in social clubs, but in the depths of his own work. And eventually, the people who resonated with that depth found him. You attract your tribe not by searching desperately, but by doing your work so authentically that they can't help but notice. You become a signal fire in the darkness, and other signal fires start appearing on distant hills. But here's what nobody tells you. Your tribe might be smaller than you imagined. And that has to be okay. You're not looking for a crowd. You're looking for quality connections that feed your soul rather than drain it. Jung had a small circle of deep friendships and many shallow acquaintances. He understood that different relationships serve different purposes. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need a few people who see you clearly and love you anyway. You need 1 or 2 conversations that leave you energized rather than exhausted. You need occasional reminders that you're not crazy for thinking the way you do, for seeing what you see, for refusing to unsee it. That's it. That's the whole list. And once you stop expecting more than that from the world, you stop feeling perpetually disappointed by it. And sometimes, here's the part that might sting a little. Sometimes your tribe is mostly yourself. Sometimes the deepest relationship you'll ever have is with your own mind, your own depth, your own complexity. Jung spent years in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, essentially having deep conversations with himself, exploring his own psyche like a vast inner landscape. And he emerged from that not broken but strengthened, not lonelier but more whole. Because he learned something most people never do. You can be your own best company. You can develop an internal richness so profound that solitude becomes a choice rather than a sentence. And from that foundation of self-sufficiency, genuine connection with others becomes possible without being desperate. You're no longer looking for someone to complete you. You're already complete, and you're looking for someone who's also complete to walk alongside you for a while. That's a completely different search. And it starts with one final realization about what all this awareness is actually for. So here's where we land after all of this. The loneliness isn't going away completely, but your relationship with it can transform entirely. You're not waiting to be fixed. You're learning to live fully awake in a world that mostly sleeps. And that's not a burden you're carrying. That's a gift you're developing. Jung believed that people like you, deep thinkers, uncomfortable questioners, the ones who refuse to stay on the surface, you're the ones who push human consciousness forward, not through loud revolutions, but through quiet integrity. By refusing to pretend, by staying authentic when it's easier to conform, by choosing depth over comfort, you're doing something most people never attempt. You're living deliberately, and that matters more than you know. Here's what I want you to do. Stop apologizing for who you are. Stop trying to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for people like you. And start trusting that your depth, your awareness, your refusal to accept shallow answers, that's not your flaw. That's your contribution. The world needs people who think beyond the script, who see beyond the performance, who dare to live authentically even when it's isolating. Now, if this video resonated with you, if you felt seen, understood, or less alone, please hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps us reach other deep thinkers who need to hear this message. And subscribe to the channel, because we're creating a space for people who refuse to live on autopilot. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next video. We're building a community here of people who think deeply, live intentionally, and refuse to settle for surface-level existence. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the loneliest part of being a deep thinker for you? Let's start a real conversation down there, the kind you've been craving. Your depth is your power. Don't ever forget that.